Welcome to another episode of Just More Fix. This is James. With me in this episode is Lacey.
Hey.
You can find us online at justmorefix.com or on Twitter at justmorefix. If you like us, you can support us at Patreon, and you can give us a rating and review at iTunes or wherever you find us at. In this episode, we're going to talk about making an RPG zine. And now, it's time to get our gaming fix.
I'm Willie D. Nelson from All Things Good and Nerdy, a pop culture podcast, part of the Gonna Geek Network. Just like the show you're checking out now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other tantalizingly geeky shows at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
Welcome to Just More Fix. Couple quick announcements before we get things started today. First off, you guys are probably tired of hearing about it over and over again, but we have another Indie RPG Day coming up this coming Sunday.
Ugh.
Sunday, June 9th.
This one's going to be especially awesome because I'm running the game.
True story. So it's from 2 to 6 at Game in Terre Haute on South 7th on June 9th. And it is going to be a Pip Core System mall crawl. So come out for some awesome, terrible 80s, 90s.
There is no 80s.
No 80s? Just straight 90s?
That's just something that you envisioned. No. We are all 90s here, my friend.
Well, I will not be there, so it's fair. But so come on out to game and come game with us and have a good time.
90s
not
nostalgia,
with us.
mall culture.
It's really just come game with Lacey because I won't be there. So sad day. Right on. Although I suppose it's a real thing now. It's like taking off and becoming its own thing because it's, you know, I've been there for all of them and now it's one without me, which means like it's a thing now, like a living, breathing thing on its own.
It's actually another living, breathing thing on its own because the game store is now running its own indie RPG Saturdays.
True that.
That are unaffiliated with us.
Which is very cool to inspire people, which is really what we set out to do, was to just get more small press games. So kudos to everyone at Game that is helping put that together and make it happen, because that's how those games get out there and get exposed. And there's a lot of really awesome stuff. So big shout out to Dylan, Simon, Roz, and Alan is running as well. And who else? Anyone else? Anyone else that is running any of those indie RPG days or indie games at their small press days, or I think it's one shots at their one shot days. I think is what they're calling it. So big shout out to them and kudos to you guys for getting out there and doing that, because that's pretty awesome. So next quick thing is, you may have noticed that we have been a little sporadic here through the month of May, and that's because the company that I work for provides the EMS coverage for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and there's this little thing called the Indy 500 that a lot of people seem to want to come and watch.
And this other little thing called mandatory overtime. Yay!
So hooray for that. So May has been difficult for us, so we've missed some episodes and been late releasing, just like this episode that you're going to be getting is a day late, but we are through the month of May, which is the sort of hell time for me for work, and should be getting back to normal again with regular releases on Wednesdays, and then every other Friday will be a Night Witches, and we've got a couple of those in the can coming out to you guys. So we're not going anywhere. It's just been sort of hectic for us. It's sort of like in our personal and work lives. And I'm the one that does all the production and the editing, so the delay is really just entirely me. So in addition to that, just so you guys know, I joined the emergency response team for large disaster response. So there is some potential that throughout the year, through hurricane season, that there may be a couple weeks where we have some issues depending on how that goes. So we're not going anywhere, but there may be some couple hiccups along the way.
But don't cry about it, because we're helping people in a time of crisis. So
true story. It's all good. So right on. All right. Well, enough boring talk about that kind of crap, because that's no fun at all. So Lacey, you pitched this idea, so I'll just turn it over to you.
You made an RPG zine.
True story.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask you some questions about that. Starting right now.
Okay.
I've never interviewed you before. This is weird. So I kind of picture, you know how you play RPGs all the time, right? And you're like, yeah, I'm playing RPGs, whatever. I think I could run this game. And then you sit down to try and run the game and you're like, oh my God, there's a lot of rules and I'm responsible for all the things and all the planning. And it's actually completely different than the process of playing in a game.
Right.
I sort of imagine that transition is about equal to I'm running a game. Oh, now I'm going to make an RPG zine. So I don't imagine that it translates like exactly. Does that make sense?
No, I see. But
Is that fair?
In terms of workload or effort you have to put into it?
Like even,
maybe?
Okay, so I'm running this game at my home table. Okay. I'm going to take this game and I'm going to make it a zine.
Okay.
But the process is completely different. Yeah, because now I'm trying to translate it in a way where all the decisions aren't what has happened at our table.
Right.
I'm trying to present it in a way that is still useful while leaving you as the GM with something that you can access during your game without all the decisions pre-made for you, but giving you creative options to turn to when you're like stuck.
Right. Okay. So I see what you're saying. And so I'm going to preface all of this by saying that I am by no means an expert in any of this.
Right. No, but that's why I actually think this is cool, right? Because you get a lot of experts in things. And when you're just starting out as a complete newbie, sometimes that expert advice is so far beyond the level of what I need when I'm first getting started. Like you tend to forget all of those little tiny questions and stumblings that you had, in the first 2 or 3.
Right. So let me flip through this here. I've got our first one in my hand, actually. So what you're asking is,
I guess, how do you start parsing down all the details of a game you're running as a GM into something that's actually useful for someone else at a table? Okay. How do you even start that process out?
I'm just going to focus initially on the one that's finished Worms and the one that's like 90% done through production, right? So I guess with Worms and both with that one and the Hastings Party, they both initially kind of sparked off as an idea, right? Mm-hmm. And it was just an idea for a game.
Right.
And then in Worms, actually, when I first sat down with it, I had no intention of actually making it a zine. I wrote up a bunch of game notes, like, a small bit of prep that I do. And my prep is generally very light anyway. And I had like a page of notes, basically, and some notes about the monster and this infection and the overall scenario. And then just ran it. And it went well, which, like, not to sound super surprised, but like it went well. I've been running games a long time, right? And so most games go pretty okay, right? I still miss and still have bad sessions, but as time has gone by and I've got more experience, I have more tricks in my bag to go to sort of keep things on track and do whatever, right? But this game, the first time I ran Worms, it went really well. It was fun. It was creepy. It had the right elements of horror that I was going for, and it hit the right buttons. And it was the scenario itself was something that you didn't see a whole lot. So that sort of did most of the work for me, right? And then I ran it. I had those notes. I had the notes that I took during the game, right? Then I ran it again, and then I kept those notes. And then I think by the third time I ran it, I had different choices and different things that had happened throughout the game, right? So obviously that's not every choice that a player is going to make, but I feel like we have good players at our table and at all of our tables that I ran this for. And
okay, so how does that player choice during the playtesting inform what actually shows up in the zine? Like, what of that is actually useful to you? Like, can you give me an example of this is something that happened in the game and here's a direct translation that you see in the zine?
Okay, hang on. Let me. Well, first looking at this on the back of it, the way ours are formatted is that there are encounter tables on the back, right? Mm-hmm. So I didn't have encounter tables rolled up initially. I ran the game, and then as things happened, I thought, oh, that was a cool encounter. That's going to go on a table, right? So that was sort of like the easiest thing that when I went through and I thought about the game, what were the highlights of the game that became part of the zine, right? So it wasn't a way for me to because first off, I'm not a fan at all of any kind of box text or any kind of thing that walks you through in some kind of a linear progression. It just doesn't work for me personally at the table. And I want the things that I make to have my own sort of flavor to them. So they're made with my own creative sensibilities or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So those moments became sort of like encounter things on the table. And then that way a player could take them, because what a good moment at our table may not turn into a good moment at someone else's table. So that way it's like open-ended so that you can do with it what you want. So that's the easy one. Actually, I have two. The Worms zine is based on sort of like an infection that happens, right? Mm-hmm. So we both work in the medical profession, and through listening to podcasts and other just weird, creepy things we've done, in other games. We've been attracted to playing medical characters in prior games before. So I didn't include anything about period medicine or treatments for things, right? And it got brought up in a couple of the different games. And then I thought, the most people probably don't know about this. And even most medical professionals that are playing RPGs may not have any idea, and they may make assumptions that are way off from what contemporary medical...
Oh, of course in the 1700s everyone is washing their hands before they do things.
Well, even beyond that, even beyond basic sterile techniques like balancing the 4 humors, and there's still bloodletting people, and you got to get the bad air out and all this kind of craziness. So there's lots of way out there wacky stuff. So I thought, when I put it together, I think there's maybe a couple paragraphs or something. Let me see. Yeah, it's about, 1, 2, 3, 4, about 5 short paragraphs about 17th century medicine. And it's basically just to blast it at you, because I'm not an expert in it, but here's just quick things. If you need something on the fly, these are the things that you can reference and some key terms to use and throw out there for a good flavor that will make it work, right?
Okay. So questions that come up frequently are answered
right
in this for the person that's going to be running the game, so that they have the appropriate response for that.
Exactly, because I felt like a lot of stuff, and this is something I picked up a little bit from running or from playing games with Kurt sometimes, is that he likes, even if he's not an expert or has any idea about it, whatever the subject matter is, he picks up a couple good key terms to use to throw out there. And we're all playing a game, so it's through suspension of disbelief. If you have those terms, everybody's willing to roll with it, and not really, unless you've got someone who is truly a medical historian at the table, no one really cares. We just want to have a good time and laugh about, oh my God, it was that bad back then? Oh yeah, it was. And then there's this moment of terror. And then also, on the other side of it, if you think that you want to have that more featured in your game, you may read those couple paragraphs and be like, whoa, that's crazy and terrifying. I'm going to go do a quick Google search, read a couple Wikipedia articles, and then you're off to the races. Right? And that's, in terms of gaming, that's basically what it is.
I'm just laughing. People should be very careful when Googling things related to the medical field.
True. Very true. The other thing was that I added was a couple extra locations. So when the games that we played, they were pretty straightforward and they went relatively quickly. And I thought, well, if people don't jump right into this, there needs to be some extra fluff in there for them to be able to find things. So that wasn't something that happened in the playtest necessarily, but there were other things that I wanted to add in there to give a different sense of other avenues to pursue, in case you wanted to make this a couple game session kind of a thing, or if you wanted to develop into something larger, then you could do that. Does it make sense?
Yeah. I don't know if you can answer this question or not. I guess, is there anything that when you sat down and we were playing it, you thought, yes, I'm going to include this, but then it felt like too clunky or boxed it in too much and you ended up taking it out? Because, sometimes you sit down and you're like, oh, well, this is really cool in my game, and you make an effort to include it, but then you run it a few more times and it doesn't naturally seem to fit in every time as well as you maybe thought that it would.
So I have kind of an example of this, but I'm not sure. And I've done it in this one because... So I'll give me a minute and I'm going to circle kind of around to it because I want to explain something. Okay. So in this specific game, Worms and in the Hastings Party, there's a big element of body horror, right? And I like body horror and it's all good. But when a lot of people think of body horror, they think of gore. Right. So what I did was at the very beginning, I talk about this is body horror and I give you specific examples of body horror. Right. Now, each of those examples are scenes that happened in our game. Okay. And without telling you, steer your players through these moments of horror, right? Because I don't want to do that, because that I feel like it makes it clunky, right? Because what makes it horrible is the fact that you don't feel like you're being led through it. You feel like you're sort of stumbling through and discovering things and discovering terrible things, right? And horror and like, I'm not in control of my own body now and that kind of stuff, right? That's what makes it horrible. So what I tried to do was take it out of the context of saying, here is how you walk your players through these moments to give them fear and terror. And what I did was broke them down into basically 2 sentences. And there's maybe a dozen plot points or whatever, or I think I call them moments of body horror that we went through. And not every one of them happened in every game. And whatever, some of them are better than others, And so they're listed in there in that kind of a way. And I felt like that was one way for me to get some cool moments that we had in our games and maybe provoke some different thought in the people running it about how to think about body horror and how to bring body horror elements into your game along with your own horror sensibilities for your own table. And a specific one is in the Worms one, there's a moment where I really enjoy the midwife being a vector for transmission of a disease, right? So there's a moment where there's a midwife who has been tending to her patients, infecting all of them unknowingly, right? And then she's a midwife, so she goes to deliver a baby. There's a mother who is delivering a baby, and she is infected. So the moment is that as the players walk in, they burst in the room because they realize the potential with the midwife. In the games that I had, they burst in as the baby's getting given to the mother to nurse for the first time. And in that moment, the worms are reaching for the baby, right? And so while that may not work at everyone's table, right? So that's obviously, you don't want to put that in as a scene because then it doesn't work. And then also it's kind of clunky because, like, how do you force them into trying to find the midwife if they don't pursue her at all? You know? So that's what I kind of circling back around to it. That's a moment that worked great at our table, but may not work for your table at all. It may not even be a possibility if they don't even if it's appropriate for your table because there's no midwife that they pursue. Like, how does that all come together? So that's why that's how I sort of solve that in my own way, was just say, hey, here's some cool moments of body horror that you can incorporate however you want to make that look or whatever. Does it make sense? Mm-hmm.
So that particular section reminds me a lot of Bluebeard's Bride when they talk about how to create horror, because they give you examples of, you know, creating vulnerability, creating the maternal feeling, and you know what I'm saying?
No. I wonder if I just didn't, like, because I read those books and I don't remember that. And it's one of those things where you wonder, like, did that sink in the back of my brain somewhere? And then it's like, it just sort of, you know, came out and was like, oh, cool.
Well, and because that book is heavily about feminine horror,
right,
which a lot of
totally
people
different than...
don't get. And so then they explain it in a way that's very clear, like, you know, what does vulnerability look like?
Right.
You know, what does being shamed for not being a proper woman look like?
Right.
So I kind of saw that in that section and, you know, kind of laid out in a similar way. And so I guess that segues into my next question. Were there specific things when you laid out the zine that you looked at for inspiration? Were there other RPGs or other zines
just
that you
as
definitely...
a physical artifact? Like as a physical product, like in terms of like how it's put together? Is that what you're talking about?
I don't know, like layout or topic wise, but... You know, you see other things and you think, I really like how this was done. I really like having a random encounter table for this city. I really like how this map looks. I really like how they explained this section. You know, can you identify other RPGs you looked at for inspiration when you were creating this scene? Like what were you like, oh, that piece of layout is just fantastic.
So I don't know that there's, I don't know that I could point to something specific in here. Like, look at this table and you can look at another thing and say, that's where this came from. Right. But there are a few very specific things that I took for inspiration in a more broad way, I guess. Right. So there's zines, so they're small. So there's not much real estate and there's not a lot of word count. So you got to be very efficient about that. And I also didn't want to go to a font that was super small because Mothership, while I love it and it's really good, their font is pretty small, right? Now, it's still legible for me, but I imagine there are people out there that struggle with it, right? So Mothership is the first one because Shah McCoy, and the way he goes about laying out his stuff, and he's got lots of posts on his blog, outside of any just having looked at loads of other games and stuff before, Mothership and specifically his kind of sensibility about how he puts things together is very similar to how I like the aesthetics of things to look, right?
And
so
his blog is
Failure Tolerated.
Yes.
So thinking about the book when it's open on the table, or the zine when it's open on the table, you know, that you're not splitting the pages in such a way to where you have to turn the page to find out what the next part of what you need is, right? So like if there's a monster, it's all on one page or whatever it is, right? The front and back end papers of whatever it is, that's where important information is because it's easy to access. So all the tables are on the back, and the table of contents, there's no index because it's small, but there's a table of contents on the front, and it lays out exactly where everything is, you know, nice big clean headers. Basically just want it to be easy as possible to use was the first thing. And then also, if you've seen a lot of the old D&D stuff, the cover is not connected to the actual content, and it has like a map or whatever on the inside. So that's like just a throwback to something that I thought was always really cool back in the day, because then you got it and you opened it up and it kind of doubled as a screen and there's a map and whatever on it, and it was just fun. So yeah, I don't know, as far as other stuff, there's a lot of like the DIY D&D stuff, the OSR stuff. There's a lot of like, I'm trying to think, I'm a big fan of Necromantic Gnome's basic expert thing that they've put out. Those are like real small pamphlets or whatever. There's some pretty good inspiration in there. The Lamentations of the Flame Princess stuff is laid out in a really cool way. I'm a big fan of. That's something I did actually on my own. So like, I talked about the end papers, right? The beginning and the end. So in Worms, and it will be the same way in Hastings Party, the center fold where you open it up in the center spread, right? So when you sort of like lay a book or a zine down, it kind of naturally wants to open to the middle, right? So it's like, this needs to be the centerpiece of this thing. So you have the cover, and the cover's what grabs you, right? And I wanted the center of the zine to be like, ooh, what is this thing? That's the feature, the climax of the scenario or whatever. So in Worms, it's in the veins of the earth, so it's deep down, it's dark, and I really like how Patrick Stewart, the way he wrote in Veins of the Earth, talked about how light is a commodity and all this kind of stuff, right? So the page is entirely black, and then it's white text on black and all this kind of stuff. And so there's some of that kind of stuff. I wanted the thematic part of it, to kind of go along with it. So I don't know that entirely answers it, but I've looked at so many RPG books and games as time has gone by. They kind of like all have crept in there at some level.
No, that's okay. I didn't,
But like, I can tell you though,
things that you maybe referenced when you were making this as far as design and layout choices. And
so I guess like to just list them off, I guess would be Mothership, that Mothership from Tuesday Night Games, BX from Necromantic Gnome, the core book from Lamentations of the Flame Princess, Veins of the Earth from Lamentations, and I think those are probably the three big ones right there. Or I guess that's four. I can't count. So, but those would be the big, and then the really old stylistic choices of Dungeons and Dragons with the cardstock cover and stuff like that. I didn't font choices and stuff like that. I just went with things that were easy to read, but I also really like that sort of Victorian font because I think it looks really good. And then it also kind of fits with the time period that a lot of the stuff is for or whatever.
Okay. Another big discussion I hear is about how expensive artwork is for things.
Right.
So talk to me about how you went about finding artwork, how you decided like what you were willing to spend. How much did you actually spend on artwork?
Right.
How did you decide where you needed pieces of art to go?
So this is going to come across really, really bad in a way, but I'm going to preface it by saying there are loads of great artists out there. And the artist that we use for the custom pieces that are in Worms, his name is Mustafa Bakir, and we're using him for the Hastings Party as well. And I'm super satisfied and happy with what he's done. He's a really, really good artist and has the right kind of style for what I'm looking for, right? But art is expensive, okay? And we'll talk about cost and price and all that kind of stuff here in a minute. But like, it's not to try and undercut artists that are out there, because I think they should all be paid well for what they do, because if you have the right style and the right skill, then you deserve to be paid what you're worth, right? But public domain art is an amazing source, especially if you're just getting started and your budget is limited and you can't pay for stuff. So I really like early period woodcuts from like 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th century, right? I think early printmaking stuff is really cool. So I like the idea of period artwork if you have like a sort of pseudo historical product. Do you know what I mean? Because it kind of evokes some of that feeling of that old timiness to it, like the way they have the weird perspectives and some of the stuff, and whatever. And so that's a lot of the stuff that I found, and it's public domain, so you don't have to pay for it, because like these woodcuts are from the 1300s. Now, not everything is, but a lot of that stuff from that time period is all public domain. It's just a matter of getting a hold of it. And like Wikimedia Commons has a bunch of free stuff on there. There's loads and loads and loads of different websites that have public domain art. And obviously you should always attribute the people whose artwork it comes from, because part of my thing too is there's a lot of these really cool masters of artwork that have sort of been forgotten in a lot of ways, because let's be honest, woodcuts aren't the most popular thing, right? So I thought, well, if I put these in here and I attribute them, maybe people will find artwork that they think is really cool and they like, right? And so then it would people would see it and they would think it's cool and they might go look up and see some of these crazy masters that did these incredible woodcuts and engravings, right? So kind of trying to get the word out there about something that happened 800 years ago or whatever, right? You know what I mean? So that was part of it, I guess. And then in the Hastings Party one, there are 3 different watercolor landscapes that are in there that kind of give the feel for the isolation and stuff. So I guess there's lots of public domain artwork out there to get that you can use for free, right? But as far as finding it, I just Googled the art styles that I liked or what I was looking for, and then found artists that were really, really old and really, really dead, and then went to look and see if I could find public domain artwork for them. So for the woodcuts, I just typed in 14th century woodcut, 13th century woodcut, and started to look through them. And then I might include some key terms that I wanted, like 14th century leeches, because like worms are close enough. I could find artwork that was pretty close to what I was looking for, It wouldn't be exactly, but it would be close enough to give you the feel and then still sort of evoke that historical sensibility, which is really what I was going for. And then there were pieces that I couldn't find historical evidence of. Obviously, there's no terrifying little men that live in caves that have giant infectious stuff in them, right? So those are the pieces that I commissioned to have done to sort of try and keep it stylistically similar. Sent the other artwork that was going to be in there and said, these are the other pictures that are in there. They're public domain. This is what I'm looking for. And I want to kind of try and, not take your style out of it because I want that in there, right? But also, kind of stylistically be similar to this early period style or whatever. It's a really long way to get there, but...
And how did you find an artist that was stylistically similar?
By dumb luck, and this is just a terrible way to say it, but I was surfing through, I think, an OSR group on Facebook or something, and saw this artwork and was like, that's really cool, and that looks very similar to a woodcut. So then I just messaged him on there and was like, do you do commissions? And then he messaged me back, and then poof, next thing you know, artwork in the zine. So... There's all that said, though, I actually, before I found Mustafa Bakir specifically, I was on DeviantArt and I was just looking up, woodcuts and that kind of stuff, and I had found some people that I was going to contact, but then I found someone who was specifically on an OSR forum, and I was like, ooh, I would rather use someone who already knows what this is. And when I reference different things, if I tell you a frost giant, you know what that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're already into this RPG scene already. So that's why I chose to go that way. And then also, if you're into RPGs and you're an artist, maybe, I might help you get to do more RPG artwork, which is always good, So would like to help out the fellow tabletoppers out there if I can.
I am going to highlight my ignorance for a moment in hoping that I am not the only one that this never, ever occurred to. I like books, but I am not an English and grammar junkie. Right. I'm a science person.
Me either, but okay.
I never published anything in my entire life. Mm-hmm. I don't get paid to edit things.
Right.
I had no idea that fonts were copyrighted. Yeah. Not a clue. So I feel like when we talk about art, maybe we need to talk about font too. Just so for anybody else that is not aware and is gleefully ignorant like I was, some fonts you just can't use just because you want to, even though they're just letters. They're like fancy art letters. Right.
Yeah. So you may have to buy a font or whatever. Now, I did not. Just on a personal level, I'm a big fan of open source stuff. So like that factors into me for a lot of things that I do. So all the layout software, all of it was done with open source stuff, right? Because I like that. Ever since Adobe changed their model for how they do things, it's pushed me way towards open source. And there are all the fonts that are in the Hastings Party and the Worms and all the zines that we will continue to do are all open source fonts, so that you can just use them. And some of them have a requirement like, hey, if you're going to use this, I want you to email me whatever it is that you use or whatever that you create, or I want to know what it is so I can know where my font is being used, And I think that might just be a thing for whoever creates them to know, maybe I should make more of this style of font because it's successful and people are using it. I don't know.
And how do you find out if you're allowed to use the font in the first place?
1001 Fonts, I think, is the website that I went to, or DaFont, DAFont.com or something like that. If you just search DaFont, it'll come up. And then they have a search engine of their own that you can search through all their fonts. And then you look for the ones that are free to use commercially, and then you're good to go.
Okay, cool.
So like in the font file, there's a README file inside there that will say some of them are open source and free to use, but you have to email them, and it had like the email address in there and stuff like that. So
okay. So we've talked a little bit about using open source stuff and open source software. So I feel like we should mention the monetary return for something like this. Just so that, like, you know, if anybody is suffering under a delusion, they're going to make $1 million on their RPG zine.
So
have you made any money on this? Okay.
No. So the artwork was all paid for by our awesome patrons through our Patreon. And that's hopefully, as time goes by, that's where the majority of this will come from. And then the layout I did, the writing I did. So basically, I did everything for it except for the artwork and physically printing the physical zines. So that was a cost saving. I don't know that I'd say it was labor saving, but it was definitely a cost saving. And most software is pretty intuitive now anyway, so you can make something that's pretty passable without, you know, a lot of experience. And then that's just how you learn to do things, is you just do it and do it and do it, and then eventually you learn.
What programs did you use to make this thing a reality?
So there's really three main ones. I used GIMP, which is a Photoshop basically, right? It's an image editing software, and that's free. And I used OpenOffice to do the word processing part and the typing part of it, you know, and that is open source as well. It's basically Word, or what's the other one? Microsoft Word?
Notepad?
No, I'm thinking Works. Oh my God. Wow. 1985 came back.
Yeah, nobody uses Microsoft Works.
Right. So, and then to do the layout, I do Scribus, which is a layout software that is open source, but it's described as cantankerous, and I think that's an accurate statement. It has, like, obviously with open source stuff, there's some functionality that you don't get sometimes, you know, with software you're going to pay for. But for the cost and what I'm using it for, it does just fine for me. And I've sort of learned how to work with it, and it hasn't been a problem. So, and
did you just like muddle through it, or were there any, you know, was there like, I went to YouTube and watched videos of somebody using Scribus, or so, how did you figure that out?
I've got a fair amount, I've got a little bit of layout experience, but prior to this, all of this, through a printing company or whatever. But so there are loads of YouTube videos. So like if you want to do the very basic entry level tutorial, because I did that for Scribus because I hadn't used it at all. And
that's just like built into the program. There's a tutorial that you can...
No. I just went on YouTube and searched Scribus tutorial.
I thought it was
like
a thing on the program.
How to Scribus, and it just there's loads of stuff out there, and it's all free, and you can look it up, and it's all easy to do. And then once you get the very basics down, it's time to start to go to work, and then that's how you learn things. And when you get to something you can't figure out, then you just go to YouTube or wherever, and you just Google, I don't know, whatever you want to do, like GIMP, blurring layers together, or whatever it is that you need to, and I guarantee you there's something out there for you to find it. So
how do you decide on length? Is there like a standard zine length that's, you know, 5 to 1 billion pages? So, at some point it's going to be a book, right? So
right.
What makes it a zine?
So I was doing some research on zines in general, not RPG zines, but like how big can they be, all this kind of stuff. And it sounds like 40 pages is where the what they call the saddle stitching, the staples that put it together, don't really do it anymore. So that's the max length. From what I understand, at that point, it's time to go to a perfect bound, which is like what most of your indie games are, like the soft cover style. Mm-hmm. So less than 40.
More than 2.
Yeah, obviously.
Probably. I mean,
and then as far as length goes, I just sort of began putting it together, and it sort of just developed as I put it together, and then things started to make sense where they went, and grouping things together and whatever.
Okay. And so now you're in process on the second zine.
Right.
And you mentioned to me that it was going faster because you kind of had a handle on what the layout was going to look like and how it was going to flow.
Right.
So how much of this first zine can you use as a layout model for the next one? Like, how does that work?
Most of it, I guess you might say, because I'm a big fan of like stylistically things that look similar. You know what I mean? You know, so I have a template basically now. So the covers will all hopefully look largely the same. And then like the way the tables are on the back will be the same. And so ideally, if you see it, you'll say, oh, that's from James or Lacey or whoever at Just One More Fix. So the initial part of it actually will go pretty quickly because the way the basic, like what they call a master page is together and done. So then you just sort of have to plug things in there, right? And then there's some customization with the artwork and where does the artwork go and all that kind of stuff. But the big heavy lifting was already done on the first one because it took me a long time to figure out how do I like the cover to look. Okay, I need this to come down a half of an inch instead of being here or whatever it is, right? So there's a lot of, I don't know, tedious, like nitpicking things and whatever, and especially if you're into print stuff, I'm not an expert, but I know enough to be dangerous, and getting things to flow the right way so your eye tracks the right way when you look at it and stuff.
Was it worth it? I mean, like, really. So it's a lot of time that you're not getting paid for. But right. I mean, to be fair, you would be making games in your spare time. Maybe not like a finished zine, but you're making games to run for people in your spare time anyway, especially if you're doing like a con game. So you're maybe going to run the same scenario, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, whatever. That's
actually how this started out. Was this Worms thing was just going to be a scenario that we were going to run. And then that's why it developed into something larger or whatever. So
in theory, we think anyone can make a zine.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But is it worth it?
So at this point, strictly financially, I would say probably not.
Oh, but no decision is strictly financial.
No. But I think it's important to mention that people go into this eyes open, that this is going to be a labor of love and it's going to cost you money. And if there is going to be someone out there that's going to think it's really cool, because creative-wise, there's a lot of people... And it's easier to get these things into people's hands than ever now because of digital products, right? So I will say that financially, it may not be worth it. But in terms of like making games and being able to say, I published this zine and this is mine and look at it, it's cool, and sort of getting it out to people and engaging that way, I had a great time doing it. It's really cool and really fun. It's made me consider things differently in my games because when I sit down to run a game for our regular table, right, I already know everybody and everybody's generally speaking their sensibilities, right? So I run the game and it's all good. I don't need to make all these notes about different things to include because I already know that. It's already inside my head, right? But when you have to put that down for someone to make a usable product for someone else, you have to put that stuff in there because it's not in your head. It's got to be in the book or whatever, And some people really want value out of what they're going to buy from you or whatever, right? And understandably so. So you can't do all this shorthand stuff of how you write your notes up and you just write weird guy in the end, underline it twice, right? You can't do that. It doesn't work. You know what I'm saying? You got to give them a name and you've got to give them a reason to be there and all these little things. And I talked about economy of words being part of this too. It's really cool to be like, how concise can you cut things down to really deliver the feel and the information that you need to, It's really kind of interesting and challenging. And then it makes you realize some of your own creative tendencies that you go back to all the time, and that kind of stuff. And I think that it makes you a better game master for sure. So in terms of if you're just looking to improve what you do, I think it does that, At the same time, you got to be able to understand, though, you're going to live with this thing for quite a while you're making it, because if you're the only one working on it, right, you've got to do all that work. So like our cycle right now is every 3 months basically, right? So once a season we're gonna have a zine come out, right? And it's not terrible. Thank God you talked me out of what I was thinking before. It was
a terrible idea.
Because I was being a crazy person, and I would have realized that and we would have backed off of it because it just like every other month, it just isn't sustainable for what we have to do and our normal lives anyway, right? But I definitely think it's worth it. It's been a great time. It's been a cool experience for me. And here before too long, we're going to have physical copies in a game shop and stuff. And that's just cool to be able to say, it's like, I'm not planning to quit my job as a paramedic tomorrow to go do this, obviously, or anytime ever. But like, it's cool to be able to go do it, and that kind of a thing. So
was there anything when you were making the zine that really surprised you? Like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that was going to be so difficult, or, oh, that was easier than I thought it was going to be, or, just anything unexpected that happened in the making of the zine that you now appreciate RPG designers more than you did before you set out on this quest?
That's a hard question there, because I suppose it made me appreciate some designers more and others less, if that makes sense, because there's a gajillion role-playing products out there now, right? It's like the golden age of gaming, right? There's just more than ever out there. And there are products that I really, really like and enjoy across lots of different game lines, right? And the ones that are put together well and easier to use, and the way they're just like an overall product, the artifact of what it physically is, it made me appreciate those more because I can see where the work went into it. You know, I understand how difficult it can be to get these things to fit together on the page, right? When you're trying to get these two columns and this piece of artwork and this heading and whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And making it, one, aesthetically pleasing, two, useful, and still, you know, an actual physical product, right? So the ones that I like, I definitely appreciate more. But there are lots of other books and stuff that are out there that I'm just kind of like, for what your budget is, I'm not sure that we're getting the full value. You know, does that make sense? You know, so that surprised me in a way. But it seemed, you know, I guess it just reinforced it too, because from talking to some of the other game designers and people we've interviewed, they've kind of expressed that already. And it really just drove it back home for me and, you know, sort of made me realize again, oh yeah, like this isn't that hard. What is the problem, you know? But everyone has their own style and whatever they're looking for. So if your style doesn't match mine, whatever, that's fine, I guess.
I think that's all the questions I had, actually. So anything I didn't touch on that you would really feel like needs mentioning?
So I guess just to say that it really isn't as hard as what you probably think it is, but it is labor intensive, right? The amount of work is more than what you probably think it is, but how hard it is to do is probably not as hard. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And I really, when initially I thought about doing Worms as a zine, I thought I don't want to do Zine Quest because it was right around that time. And I didn't want to do a Kickstarter and not have something ready to go. You know, like that bothers me. I don't want people waiting on me and on my creativity. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I just don't like that model. I'm not against Kickstarter, obviously, because I back lots of stuff, but I didn't want to have people waiting on me to feel creative and make something. I would rather have something made and then you pay me to print it. You know what I'm saying? You know, right. Or pay for artwork or whatever. So what I would say is if you feel like you've got a good amount of experience at running games and like all that kind of stuff, and you've read loads of RPGs and that kind of stuff, that you're probably ready to go. It's really not that big a deal. You know, the big thing is that I think it's Stephen King says if you write more than you read, you're probably a terrible writer, you know, and I feel kind of the same about this process here, right? So if you haven't looked at, you know, the way different RPGs present themselves and different supplements present themselves, right? You probably ought to do that if you want to do the layout part of this, you know, and that kind of stuff, and do your research and do your homework and look at what's out there and find stuff you like and, you know, don't steal from it, but imitate it. That's the highest form of flattery is imitation. So
I guess that kind of touches on another question, I suppose. When, at the moment that you realized that you were going to make an RPG zine, but you hadn't actually done it yet, did you start looking at RPGs differently? Like, did you start looking at them to see, oh, I really like the way this was done. Oh, I could do without that. Did it change your perspective in how you were consuming RPGs?
Maybe a little bit. I mean, we've been reviewing games for a long time, and usability and the way it looks has been part of those reviews, right? And so I guess the way I look at RPGs changed, like physically, about 3 years ago as we've continued to do reviews, right? Now, doing this, it has changed a little bit more because now when I look at it, I still look at it with a critical eye like we would review it, but now it's also a little bit of, well, how would I have fixed this problem that I see? There are, you know, like maybe there isn't even a problem. Maybe it's just how would I make this more me if this was my project, right? A little bit, but this podcast has probably affected more of how I look at RPGs than anything else.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess the only other couple things that I would mention is that I know I already mentioned Shah McCoy's blog already, but just specifically his layout style is very friendly to the zine kind of a movement or whatever. And Mothership, I think, is 36 or 40 pages or whatever. So it's right in there, you know, and you can look at you can, see what he talks about. And then if you get the physical product, you can see it in action, right? Because it's very much side by side. You can see sort of that. And that was very, very helpful to me. The second part of it, I would say, is that zines are meant to be small. And I think that can be your biggest ally because it's real easy to get pretty verbose and you want to go on and on and on and you don't need to, right? So, you know, like cross stuff out and edit the hell out of it and, you know, like mark stuff out and, you know, be concise with your words and cut it down. This is 2 paragraphs. Could it be 1? You know, because I feel like one of my favorite things about some of the really smaller like DIY D&D stuff and the adventures that they have is the fact that there is enough of an idea there to give you a springboard to start from and then to begin your narration and running the game to your players, but not so much to where I've got to read 2 paragraphs about whatever this thing is right now in this moment, because I can't exactly remember, instead of having like, 1 paragraph or just a couple bullet points or whatever, and when you have only 20 pages that you're going to set this thing at or whatever it is, it really makes you sort of like keep carving away all of the fat till there's only, meat left. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So, yeah. And then credit, credit, everybody, credit yourself for everything you do, the layout, the design, the writing, credit the artists, credit the people that help you play test it, credit the people that help you edit it and don't edit your own stuff. Like initially, yeah, you've got to edit yourself.
Edit it a little bit, please.
Yeah. But like, well, no, like as you type things, right, you just keep, my process is just like spit it all out as fast as you can, right? So I can get all the ideas out of my head and then go back and I'll reread it and kind of put it back together. So it's something that resembles a coherent thought. And then have someone else read it because you can't see your own mistakes that way. So, and then whoever
beta readers,
whoever does that for you, credit them as well, and credit your playtesters, and then run the game and see if what you have here actually stands up on its own. And if you can, print a test copy and give it to someone and say, hey, check us out, try and run it, and then tell me how much of a disaster it was. you know what I'm saying? Like, how much did you have to adapt that wasn't already there, and those kind of questions. Yeah, I guess that's it. I don't know. I don't have a whole lot else. I guess I don't know.
Okay.
I can say it's been a really cool and fun process, and I really enjoy doing it, and I'm going to continue to do it. And I'm excited to be done with the Hastings party, because then you're up next, because you're going to do the next one. And I think it's going to be fun to be able to
agreeing to that.
I think it's going to be fun to just play with the layout and just focus solely on that and whatever, and sort of practice that more as opposed to everything. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So this kind of turned out to be a giant... No, I guess not giant, but this kind of turned out to be a bit of a plug for our zine or whatever. And it's, I'm super happy with them and excited, and they've been a lot of fun to do. But outside of being a plug for our own stuff, like go out there and do this and make these yourselves. If you have if you've ran games at cons a couple times, or if you had a game session that was really, really cool and really, really shined, not every game needs to be a zine, obviously, but the ones that really shine or that you've really sharpened down, they do. Maybe they do. So do it. On a side note, the one thing I will say is that I had an update all posted, typed out and posted for on our Patreon about finding artwork and how to go about doing that and listing out the websites that I've used. And in the process of uploading it while I was at work on the truck, we went into an area that had no signal, and it didn't save it as a draft as it was publishing it, and it all died. And then I was mad, so I didn't retype it. So... I'll probably do that here again in the very near future. So all the places that I went to find that public domain artwork will be linked in there, and that'll be coming up within the next week or so. And you'll find that at patreon.com/justonmorefix. So as you know, we are a member of the Gonna Geek Network. So Lacey has a quick Gonna Geek promo for us. So
on the Bubble Podcast, most recent episode, Witchblade, First Wave, and the Dresden Files, plus the role of physical items in fan campaigning. Fans of the Dresden Files sent drumsticks, First Wave fans sent salt packets, and Witchblade fans sent Pez dispensers. But did any of these items actually move the renewal needle? I don't know, but you will have to listen to On the Bubble Podcast and find out.
Very good. Right on. So thank you guys for hanging out and listening to us this week. Hopefully, if you're into zines or if you want to make zines, that this will give you some inspiration to get out there and do it. And if you have any questions, you can email me, James at JustMoreFix. You can hit us up on our Facebook group or on Twitter. I'm at JUHoss, and then we're at JustMoreFix as well. If you have any questions that I can help you with in how to do any of this, I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert, but I know enough to be dangerous, and maybe I can point you in the right direction to get things started and help you out. If you like what we do here at Just More Fix and you want to support us and get access to our quarterly zine, the first one being Worms, which is up on our Patreon now, and the Hastings Party being our second one, which is on track to be out in July. Just commissioned our artwork for it today, actually. And should be getting that rolling in the next couple weeks. And layout is going at pace, and I've got a couple more playtests to do, and it'll be ready to go. And you can support us there at patreon.com/justmorefix and get access to all of those zines, as well as our raw audio feeds and pre-shows. and join the awesome Patreon supporters that we have, like Tiziano Furlano, Alistair H., Simon McNair, Alan White, and the OG Todd Olson. And I think that'll do it for us this week, and we will see you guys next week.
Thanks for listening. This has been an episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at incompetech.com. You can support us at patreon.com/justonemorefix or follow us on Twitter at Just One More Fix.